I don't even really know where to begin, so I'm just gonna start from the get-go. We sit down, right? And the previews start up. Usually I like the previews because I get to see all the movies that I have no plans on watching. So I make fun of them and say this movie is stupid or that movie looks dumb, whatever. Just a little bit of fun before the movie begins. But I'm sitting there and my sister looks over at me and is like, every movie is either a remake or a sequel. And I go, I know, right? What are these clowns in Hollywood doing? Come up with an original idea for once. So the previews finish, and I'm already in a bad mood. But despite all the stupid garbage that Hollywood was and is making, I had legitimate hopes for Dune Part 2. I hated the first movie, but everyone was losing their minds over this one. So I gave it a real chance to make me feel something. Like amazing storytelling, great writing, awesome world building, and emotional stakes were back and better than ever. But my high hopes for Dune Part 2 were severely dashed. So, this review is going to try and hit every aspect of the film to reveal that this emperor has no clothes.
Every hour we spend on that planet will be 7 years back on Earth.
First off, this movie is way too long. And before you start talking about attention spans and all that, I have no issue sitting here for hours on end editing my videos, or watching Lord of the Rings Extended Edition. What I do have a problem with is when you can tell the movie is dragging on. I remember glancing at the time on my phone multiple times during this movie, wondering how much longer until this is over. I never did that during Infinity War, or a lot of the other movies that encroach on the 2.5 hour mark or greater. But I have done that with movies that are way too long for no reason. This movie could have been over in 2 hours and some change, but they tacked on an extra 40 minutes. Just dialogue after dialogue after dialogue. And I want to know the story too. I want to be invested in the characters and understand their thoughts. But this isn't Dune the book. This is Dune the movie. You should be capable of taking that extra unnecessary dialogue, shaving it down, or outright removing it. For example, I already know he's not going south. And I know why he's not going south. But over and over, the audience is told, oh, if I go south, bad things will happen. Save it for the book. I don't need to be told again and again why he's not going south. The emotional stakes are not really changing that much. Every time they explain why Paul doesn't go south, things don't change. I get the point. Just tell the story through the medium of film, not the medium of a book.
No rules, no boundaries. He doesn't flinch at torture, human trafficking, or genocide.
The lack of emotional stakes or the lack of value of lives of the people that are slaughtered in this movie is just laughable. It's just as bad as the faceless aliens that show up in Marvel movies. They're just there to be killed and nothing more. Nobody ever feels remorse or struggle or suffers any great loss. There is a moment in the movie that our main character's home is destroyed. But not only their home, but the sacred pool of water that contains the water of millions, if not billions of dead people, was destroyed. And you want to know the reaction? They don't care. At all. We watched as giant rocks fell into the water, throwing it all over the place and contaminating it. Yet nobody says anything. Nobody is distraught or in deep anger or sorrow. They said this water was so precious that they would die before they drank it. But it gets destroyed and not a soul cares about it? Great storytelling, people. Really fantastic work. But that's not all. I'm going to try and ignore the shortcomings when it comes to acting and focus in on the emotional relationships between the characters. But not once in this movie did I care about anything that happened to anybody. I was so emotionally removed from the storyline. And there were so many opportunities to make me care. Paul literally kills his grandfather, a scene which is primed for a ton of emotional impact. But no reaction. Just death. Just complete emotional indifference. And then, later in the movie, Paul tells Chani or whatever her name is, I love you until my last breath.
I love you.
But then immediately turns around and tells Florence Pugh to marry him. It's a great time for emotional heartstring pulling, right? Nope. You want to know what happens instead? Zendaya looks like she just got a bad grade on a math test and walks away, while Paul just looks like 90-pound Timothée Chalamet trying to be a man with no care in the world. And in that same scene, Paul kills his cousin. Yet again, no emotions, just death. You have family killing family, lover betraying lover, but the best you can do is a couple of smirks or frowns? You can't even produce some crocodile tears? Nothing? Ay, 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 I know I said I wouldn't get into the acting, but the writers and the actors fumbled the ball harder than Cam Newton. And at least Cam Newton pretended to go after the football.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Whatever happened to these guys' ability to just fly? Maybe I'm missing some context from the book, but being able to fly seemingly whenever you want is a massive advantage over the enemy. Yet these guys stroll around on the ground with machetes like we're in the Congo or something. Why don't they have guns? Why don't they use their ability to fly? And why in the world is Dave Bautista so incompetent as a leader he can't think of protecting the spice farming machines with more dragonfly planes? Seriously, put 4 or 5 of these bad boys in the sky and the movie is over. Now I get it, I know that the main character is supposed to win, but why make the villain beyond stupid? I know Dave was replaced by psycho albino bald boy that finally used some air superiority, but he still chose not to protect the spice farmers with more dragonfly ships, or the thopters or whatever they're called. The main point here though was that the villain was made into more of an idiot than was necessary. The writers also just forgot about the villain's abilities, like the flying just disappears. I don't really get it, but they didn't take advantage of it. But the reason I would have given if I was writing the movie is that their pride was too big. That's why they didn't want to allocate more ships or more soldiers to protect the spice farmers. But that's not how they presented it in the movie. They just made it appear that the villain was trying his hardest, yet continued to fail. But you can't just make the villain stupid. You have to create a real threat. And I'm perfectly fine with overpowered main characters, but Superman still needs stakes. The hero needs his kryptonite. You can't create an overpowered hero that nobody is going to beat, that has no struggle. And they tried to correct this at the end of the movie when 90-pound Timothée Chalamet is having a knife fight with the bald boy, but we all knew he was going to win. That's because the writers did not do a good enough job creating stakes. The villain was already perceived as too incompetent and too inconsistent to ever win. Dune is nothing like Lord of the Rings, and it's not even close. That is all.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
I don't always watch movies to receive the moral of the story moment, but almost every story in human history is supposed to express or convey some kind of moral or ethical lesson. After watching this movie, I could not tell you what it was supposed to convey. I'm not sure if it was some kind of lesson on religion, which if it was, this is like Religion 101, and they even got some aspects of how basic religion operates wrong somehow. But I tried to find the moral of the story. Maybe it was about giving up the one you love to obtain power. That's not really a moral, that's just selfishness. Maybe it was about the ethics of controlling people using religion, but then again, it seemed like every main character was just confused as to who Paul was and what he's supposed to be doing. Even Paul was just lost in the sauce of prophecy and responsibility and all sorts of wacky stuff. But there was just nothing in this movie that made me walk away thinking deeply about it. I have a series on this channel called Why'd the Dad Die? It looks at the deaths of fathers in movies and goes over the impact it has on the main character. It explains how the death teaches them to be better men and better heroes. But I saw Dune Part 1 and now Dune Part 2. I can't tell you what the purpose of most of the things that happen in this movie are for. Everything and everyone is just a non. They are there to progress the story so the audience is entertained. I don't know. Maybe my disdain for the movie is blinding my judgment or ability to see what the moral of the story was. Yippee! Before going into the last segment, I want to at least talk about the good in the movie. First, the visuals were obviously very good. Much better than a lot of other recent Hollywood productions are, that's for sure. But I don't think it blew me away either. I can appreciate the CGI sand because I know that sand is hard to animate, and the sound effects were cool as well. I like the psycho bald boy, he was well portrayed by Austin Butler, and the environments that are utilized in such a dead place like sand dunes are also well done. The worms are interesting, but nothing to write home about. No, literally, how in the world are they writing this thing? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, the scenery, CGI, and some of the acting genuinely delivered. And those were the things that got me to stay until the end of the movie. I also want to say this movie is not the worst movie I have ever seen. However, it's not breaking out of the mold that most Hollywood films stuff themselves into nowadays. It's just another adaptation sequel film with big name actors that generally don't deliver. Finally, the moral of the story is either non existent or I didn't understand it.
Hamburger, cheeseburger, Big Mac, Whopper. Hamburger, cheeseburger, Big Mac, Whopper.
I want to preface this section by saying I am a Christian. I was not offended by the movie because I'm used to being mocked by society, and I know that when I'm watching Hollywood films, they will probably mock Christianity. However, we are not blind to the reality that this movie was full of religion, so I'm going to talk a lot about it. Now, the religion that was presented was kind of a mishmash of things. There was mainly Islam with the Christian version of the Messiah, and a mix of some occult and pagan practices. As I said before, I'm not offended by this movie because I'm used to Hollywood both stealing from and mocking the Bible. However, it was a little surprising to see Islam being mocked like this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be the first one to stand up and defend Islam, it was just a little surprising. But Dune targeted the concept of the Messiah and stole a lot of Christian elements, so I'll try to address all of those. To start, I just want to give a general statement about Hollywood and religion, specifically Christianity. Why is it always that you have to steal the concepts from Christianity to achieve certain storyline goals? Seriously, Paul dies and rises from the dead. His eyes are opened and he sees the narrow path. The Messiah is the one who will lead the people to paradise. Which, to be fair, the term paradise is more of an Islamic saying, but the Messiah is not the one who will get Muslims into heaven. That's a Christian idea. Then there's the part of the movie where the Messiah is going to be a warrior who will lead his people against God's enemies. This is an idea that stems from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They also say that the Messiah will fulfill all these prophecies while he's on earth. I mean, there is so much baseline, simple theological ideas that are stolen from the big three religions. It was ridiculous. And the reason I say it's ridiculous is not because I'm offended that it was used. I'm offended that it was used poorly. The story of Christ and his arc as a hero is the greatest story in the history of mankind. That is why it influences Hollywood so much. That's why the Christian elements of sacrifice and the hero rising from the dead, or at least appearing to have died and then rising from the dead, is so prevalent in Hollywood stories. But if you're going to take from the greatest story in the history of mankind, you need to do the story justice. You need to display the moral of the story. And it does not necessarily have to be the exact same moral that the Bible presents. But you need to understand the significance of Christ dying and then rising from the dead. Paul died and rose from the dead just so they could say he fulfilled a prophecy. There was no moral, there was no explanation for the importance of the death or the resurrection. They just did it to do it. They just stole it to steal it. I don't know. It's not my book. It's not my movie. But I do believe that if this was how it truly unfolded in the book, this story stinks. And it even tried to copy from the greatest story ever told. Dune Part 2 was just an overall disappointment. But hey, it was rather pro-life considering the baby was talking from the womb. So thanks Hollywood for recognizing that babies in the womb are in fact human beings.